welcome to another stand-up.
What's up, man? How you doing?
Yo, I'm great. I think today's episode is interesting because, first of all, I want to applaud you. Yesterday, we had a really dope training. I'll let you talk a little bit about what that training was, but I'd love to use today's stand-up to be a little bit of a reflection on two topics. One is creating new paths for revenue opportunities for our business. The other is, what's your perspective on creating a meaningful training program? Who's your target audience, and like, what do you aim to do with that? And so I'll pause right there for the introduction, but dude, great job yesterday. Tell me a little bit about who it was with. Maybe don't name drop, but who it was with, what were you training on? And we'll go from there.
Yeah, so this was a training program. So I think in terms of, let's start with talking about adding new revenue to the business, right? How did we come across this as a thing? Well, they asked us. I didn't even really think about this as something that I wanted to teach or anything like that. I was just generally talking about AI assisted development. I had been teaching our developers internally here some of the things that work for me. And this was another agency that came to me and said, hey, I would love to see what you're doing. Could you train my team on this? And it came out of our Long Island Technologists event where I was debuting Code Dojo, showing how I use Claude Code to act as a tutor for me to practice to just aid in my coding practice. But I had explained that during the day, I'm generally not writing code myself. That is just the reality of development in 2026 right now. If you embrace the AI tooling, you're writing very little code by hand anymore, and you're really acting as more of a gardener or a composer. The way I think of it is just sort of commanding this symphony of agents to make music, to make applications. The composer, I think of it as a composer. I think this is the better thing because the composer, I know a composer actually, and they can play a ton of instruments. They could probably play every instrument there well, to some reasonable degree. But when they get up, they're not playing at all, right? And usually the piano is their kind of go-to, right? To hear everything out. But they're very good at just the broad music concepts. And I think this is where senior level engineering is headed, and this company hired us to talk about it and to do an in-person training. And I actually thought, what better way to do this than to just do hey, this is a real task on my plate at this moment. I showed them, hey, there's actually I have 6 agents running it at any given time, but this is how I work through the day. And I move from project to project, always trigger it, as one agent kicks off and is planning, another kind of comes in, and I go to the next one and I say, this is what's on the plate, and moving forward. So it was a really interesting moment. And I think the thing that I took for granted is I'm under the assumption that every engineer is on LinkedIn and X as much as I am, following all the new tools, all the new techniques, practicing with this stuff, just experimenting with it in their day-to-day. But that is just not true. Nope. So a lot of folks were on the right track. It was really interesting because a bunch of them had tried AI maybe a year ago, and they said it didn't go well, and they never went back to it. So they just kind of made this assumption that it was no good. Or they're currently doing it and they're running into an issue where they feel like they can't get what they need out of it. And there are reasons for that. But it starts to uncover itself when you work with people on an individual level. Hey, show me what you're doing. Show me it. And so that I think is the next level of the training, which is, hey, this is broadly where agentic engineering is at. These are the things you need in your toolbox that I think you need. And it's actually a lot less tools than you think. It's really primarily one tool, but learning to use that one tool really well. And mastery of technical communication in English language is really important as well. And how to take that to, okay, now show me what you're doing, and let's see if we can work through a problem that you're having in a code base together is the next level, I think, of this.
Oh, try to apply this generally. Speaking to business owners or for engineers out there that are trying to transcend in the moment and really adopt the tools, what do you think from the way that you teach it is a strategic advantage for those types of businesses?
The strategic advantage is, and if I had to release a course as a video course, I couldn't show you my real work. I'd have to come up with a bunch of mock work, which would inevitably just work pretty perfectly because I would pick examples that worked, or I'd pick problems that it would feel very simulated. And what I loved about teaching it this way is I didn't know what was going to happen. This is a real task off my plate, real time. Here's a real batch of tasks. Here's like, we're going to do 2 hours of real work with Mike. And if I do it with you, I could say, let's do 2 hours of real work with your tasks. Like, fire up the code base. These are the tools. I'm going to sit there. We're going to mob or pair program this thing together the same way we would have learned coding 2 years ago, 3 years ago, pair programming together, walking through, hey, this is a new tool. I want to see how you're doing it. When you release a course, it's always, there's a bunch of people who just watch the video and don't do any of the exercises. I was one of those people for a long time. You're only going to get so far with that. Then there's a bunch of people that do the exercises, but those exercises don't feel applicable to what you're doing in the day-to-day. So it becomes this weird abstraction. And then there's a bunch of people who kind of take it and are able to run with it and apply it to their day-to-day work because they figure, let me run with it. But I can't make a course with the projects that I work on because these are customer code bases. I'm not allowed. I'm not allowed to have, I don't have a million open source projects to work with. And a lot of you are in the same boat. So having that one-on-one or that 1-on-5 or 1-on-10 coaching moment allows us to say, okay, let's work on real stuff. We're all under NDA here. We don't have to sit around and kind of come up with these like contrived examples.
I really like that. That's also quite different. You make a course today. The problem is, for how long is that course relevant?
Right.
And the problem is, who's the next person that comes up with another course that has a little wrinkle on it that steals your market share, your customers? Creating a course doesn't really live forever the way that you'd think it does. And so I love this idea of being in your boardroom. We love getting flown out to enterprise level boardrooms, to startups, to give them strategic advantages. We love doing one-on-one sessions on like Zoom or whatever it is with engineers that are just looking to learn from the moment. And so I love that you're using real scenarios. Yesterday was your workload, but very often it's their workload, and you're trying to come in and say, hey, I'm going to set you up with this initial toolkit. And there feels like a little bit of a barrier to entry. But I think once you get them past that barrier of entry, it's just like the fear of, using, today we use Claude in the terminal, and just like getting over that experience, you see that light bulb go off. You see like the ability to be working on 4 or 5 things simultaneously to parallelize your abilities. Like, that was never possible. It was never possible.
But you know what? It's very similar to It's very similar to making the leap in your career from a senior or a principal to a lead engineer. When you're a lead engineer, you're often coding, but you're often helping others get there, or even an engineering manager. It's usually you're not the one, you have to conduct the symphony. And so I think of it in very much the same way, that the people who are taking to this very well are typically already kind of had to make that leap of, oh, I'm not allowed to write the code myself anymore because I have to manage, I have to magnify my output, I have to make sure that all these product teams are getting the things that they want. And so for me as an agency owner, it was very easy to make this leap because I had to learn to do that. And so I think now engineers are going to need to learn to do that a little bit sooner in their career and get used to that idea that, hey, you're actually going to kind of take your work and you're going to fan it out over a few agents. And I always recommend, though, don't start multi-agent. We don't start that way. We're going to start with one project, one task, one agent, and you're going to work that way. You're going to crawl, walk, run, because it is a skill. It's a skill that must be developed. And it's really important that you don't get yourself, I have a lot of posts about this where if you start looking at tools like Gastown or Conductor that lets you try and manage all these agents, not only do I not use those things, first of all, I do manage many agents, but you have to, for a long time, I was like a 1-agent guy, then I was a 2-agent guy, 2, maybe 3. Now I'm kind of like beefing it up. I've kind of like, some days I have like 6, but there's an upper bound to where you're at skill-wise with these things. And that's okay. You're getting 2, 3, 4x productivity out of this stuff. You only need to push the envelope so far sometimes. You don't want to get to a place where you become ineffective because you're doing too much.
Okay, so that's a good segue into my next question, which is, we always talked about being 10x engineers. It was always some of our pursuit. At one point, it was just about mastery of the skill and speed to execution without the sacrifice of quality. It's not really about that anymore. So you could have 10x output of dog shit today.
Correct.
And so my next real question to you is, even though capacity increases, you're scaling the individual, their ability to produce more is now more. Where is the balance between quality and quantity, and how are you teaching that, and how is that part of your workflow?
Yeah, this is quite interesting. So I think dog shit comes from two places. One is you're just cramming things into the model and you're not ever reviewing it from a technical level, right? So you a lot of times where I think this happens is you're a really good coder. You know all your mechanics, you're a good coder, but you're not quite at the level yet where you're executing like a clean architecture. And it doesn't, we can debate, whether it's clean code or philosophy of software architecture. There's a lot of books on this, domain-driven design. This next level of engineer where you kind of don't just understand the mechanics of coding, but you're actually able to architect great code bases is really essential to being effective with AI tooling. So I think you have to elevate that level of learning for sure, because the same things that make code bases easy to work in for humans tend to be the things that coding agents would like too, but you have to enter that planning mode, and have really good habits. So one of the good habits that we've had from prior to AI development is test-driven development. It's a great where you write a failing test and then you write passing code. And some people don't exactly adhere to that strictly. I can't sit here and say that I was a strict TDD adherent all the time, but for the most part I would write my test suites and I would write my code, or sometimes I'd write some exploratory code and then I'd kind of transition back to TDD, because that you were writing code and exploring. And this is probably one of the biggest things I see from folks that have to transition this way, is they were very used to the code authoring was a part of their process of discovering the thing to build the right way, and they would continue to code and refactor and code and refactor. Now you have to do a bit more upfront planning, and don't confuse this with a big upfront waterfall planning doc. I'm talking about you get a feature and you're going to think about that ahead. And people who practice TDD tended to do this already. So I think the transition from TDD, test-driven development, to spec-driven development, what we're calling in AI, is a very soft one for most people, because they're usually writing up the spec and sometimes they're even stubbing out some tests, or at least putting the test cases in their spec. They're asking the agent to put those together so they can review them, which then brings them the business logic. It allows you to think about this problem from like, is this software doing the thing that I want it to do? And then you let the agents execute that plan. The folks that don't have that practice yet, which I think is a more senior engineer practice, because in the beginning you're really just like writing code and exploring and figuring out your process, that is going to feel a little bit messy when you get into agent land, because agents really do well with that process. And you're just going to get the output you're looking for in less attempts. And it doesn't necessarily mean the prompt is super big, but when I'm in planning mode, I'm using the symphony to compose that plan. Show me the test cases. Show me how we're going to put these. Okay, now I want you to work in these 3 phases. Perfect. Now we're going to execute, right? So there's that side of it where it's just, hey, it's a skills issue and you're not there yet, and we can work on that. And a lot of that is just leveling up your regular software practice and applying that to agentic engineering. And then there's this. Oh God, you have an interjection.
Well, I'll let you finish your thought, because mine is really just about, there are levels to this game. You're talking about, the skill set relies on multiple things. One of which is like being a great business analyst. The other thing is like having a really strong command of architecture and systems. The other one is being truly full stack. Like there's a combination of things here that make you use the tool incredibly well. And we often talk about how, you can give a contractor a nail gun, or you can give them a hammer and a nail. The nail gun is only as good as somebody's mastery of the nail gun, but they're also damn good with a hammer and a nail too. And so there are levels of education that need to be achieved here. Anybody can sit down at Claude Code today or any other code, AI coding tool and produce something. That to me seems like liability though. And so ideally, could there be a natural progression to leveraging these tools as efficiently as possible? And where should people start?
So I was going to say there's sort of going down that skills hole without kind of getting into the second reason that agents kind of get off track. We'll get over that in just a second. If you're a software company that employs software engineers, you should allow for this training to happen. I think, in the case that we're in and a lot of agencies are in, you're kind of under the gun to produce things super fast. And that can be a little bit problematic with the agents. You can produce a lot of really, really gnarly code really quickly. However, you can also refactor that code really quickly. And so I've even found that there are times when people build a very large piece of software with a lot of features, and I kind of look at the code and I go, this is not right. And I'm using the agent to fix it and using it to help me come up with plans and using it. And you do end up in a really good place also. So there is sort of this idea of make it work, make it right, then make it fast, right? And you can follow that flow with agents just over larger pieces. You just really have to embrace the idea that there are people producing more code than you can possibly review at this moment. And so we are in a little bit of a moment where we how do we level people up to produce better code and not kind of create this cruft over time? I think that we will solve that. We are solving it because we're learning just these agentic techniques are new. We're learning, like, I've only been working this way for a year. I've been handwriting code for 15. It's if not longer. So it's just a new skill set. There's countless books written on on handwriting code. There's no books on AI, or maybe there are some, but they're like PDF, unsigned. They're not reveled yet. They're just money grabs at this moment. Everybody's figuring this stuff out right now. The other side of this that this comes from, where's the second place that dog shit comes from, is product decision making. And one of the side effects of agentic development is that the engineer is being pushed into a more business analyst and product role than they have been before. And this is kind of the progression I've seen over the years, whereas in the past we'd have front-end engineers and back-end engineers, and then there was this rise of full stack because it was, as engineers got better, they were like, hey, they can learn both of these skills. And so there was this rise of the full stack engineer. And I think now you're seeing like, okay, now that we have the agents, could engineers take on this business analyst and product role? Can they? And I think that is going to be demanded because the place that you get crappy code from has nothing to do with the code itself. It has to do with just really bad product decisions and assumptions that are happening during the development process. And what are you going to do? Go talk to you're trying to get these efficiency gains, and then what are you going to call another meeting with the product team to ask every time Claude asks you that little bank of a handful of questions, like how do you want to handle this? It's on the engineer to make that decision. You're not going to let me just fire off a quick email and then get a cup of coffee. Like we're trying to move fast here. So your assumptions, and this was always the case. A lot of engineers do not realize this, but it has always been the case that engineers that make great product assumptions in the moment tend to be the most valuable engineers in the organization. It was not something that we ever were able to measure. We just knew, oh, this person's really effective because, I give them something and it comes back magically in a great place. And the same thing is happening with AI, but now those product decisions are happening in your planning mode, and they're just, it defeats the purpose of the efficiency if I have to call a meeting with the product team to answer those questions versus let me make good decisions. Now, if I make the wrong decisions, then we have a problem. And then the other side of this is feature bloat. Now that you can move faster and do more things, all those things that you would have made the tough decision about in the product development process, like, hey, we don't have time for this, we don't have time for this, the users haven't asked for this, let's not do it, you now let slide. Oh, well, they didn't ask, but it's agentic, like, it'll be done in an hour, let's just add it. You don't realize that features are friction. features create friction in your product, and they create confusion in the product a lot of time, which is almost as bad. It's almost as bad code, because you go, well, we built 20 features that nobody's using now. Do we go back and reverse them? Or even worse, we built 20 features and 3 people are using them. And the minute I can't get rid of them, I got to support them. That's another terrible scenario also. So there's a lot of product decision making that is being pushed on the engineer, for better or for worse. And you're just going to have to, I've existed in this career a long time. I've survived many shifts where I thought, oh, I'm dead now. I always talk about the shift from CSS to React. It used to be HTML and CSS that was enough to make a career. And then React came along and everybody's building JavaScript front ends, and Tailwind comes along after that. And it's like, that is no longer a thing that you can just make a career in. And I survived that. This is another one of those moments where you just, if you're going to survive, you got to just see you got to skate where the puck is going. This is where I see it going. This is where the wave is. So just learn it like you've learned anything else.
And so I'll bring us full circle back to this, which is you provide this type of training for teams, and lots of businesses don't really know how to evoke these types of things out of the professionals that they have working for them. They rest on old practices. They might not even have the vision. And so you come in, and you help bring the best out in teams and people. And you also help leadership and decision makers to identify those that are not willing to evolve. And so that's great data for businesses too, because there are folks that are out here that are really pursuing what's possible. There are folks that really have the curiosity about how they can leverage the tool, and are not really worried about how this is going to steal their job or anything, because they're just going to change their job and change the way that they think about their career. And so this is all valuable information for not only our customers, but for our program and how we run an engineering team, and like you as a thought leadership professional as well. My last question as we round third base here is, how can people get in touch with you?
LinkedIn, always. LinkedIn is the easiest way. I'm on x.com also. And of course, get one of my $2 bills, and then you got the easy access. No. Mike at causeofakind.com. Reach out. Happy to discuss, happy to help people with whatever they're struggling with. My advice is always free. So,
rock on, dude. Thanks for a great episode. Peace.